Today we're going to be talking about carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogens, and oxygens. And they pretty much come in two forms. They come in monosaccharides, mono meaning one, saccharide meaning sugar. So these are single molecules of sugar. Let's go ahead and write some of this down. Monosaccharides, monosaccharide. Again, mono meaning one, and saccharide meaning sugar or sweet. And there's lots of different types of monosaccharides. For example, glucose and fructose, which is a sugar found in fruit. Let's go ahead and write those down, and then we're going to draw some pictures. So we've got glucose and we've got fructose. Now, glucose and fructose both have the same chemical formula. They're both made up of 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. So we'll go ahead and we'll write that again. So they have the same chemical formula. However, those atoms are actually connected together differently in different orientations. So let's go ahead and draw some of those. So structural formulas. So for example, glucose actually looks like a hexagon. There it is. Now over here on this corner is an oxygen atom. And each one of these lines are understood to be chemical bonds, specifically covalent bonds. In each corner, this corner, this corner, this corner, this corner, this corner, is understood to be a carbon atom. Now you can write those in there if you want, but you don't have to because it's understood. And then up here we're going to have a branch, a carbon branch coming off the main body. And then off the two corners we have a special functional group called a hydroxyl group. And that is going to be abbreviated OH for a hydroxyl group. So the hydroxyl group is made up of oxygen and hydrogen. And there's a covalent bond between those two. Now because oxygen and nitrogen and fluorine are very electronegative atoms, that means they have a very strong attraction for electrons. So whenever they form a bond, a covalent bond, a sharing type of bond with another atom, they're not going to share electrons equally. In fact, the oxygen is going to kind of hog the electrons a little bit. The oxygen is going to pull those electrons a little bit closer to itself. And in doing so, that oxygen atom becomes slightly negative. And the hydrogen becomes slightly positive. And the same thing goes for over here too, slightly negative and slightly positive. Now, that's actually an important thing right there, because that makes this hydroxyl group, and that's what that is. That's a hydroxyl group. It's a type of functional group. There's lots of different functional groups, but it's a type of functional group. And what it does is it actually imparts special functions to this glucose molecule. In fact, it helps make this glucose molecule very polar or hydrophilic. That means it likes to interact with water, and that's an important property of this molecule. Also, this functional group is the site where chemical reactions actually occur. So when we talk about glucose molecules being connected together later, that's where the connection is actually going to be made, right there at the hydroxyl group. So very important functional group. So that is going to be glucose. Now, if you count up the atoms, let's go ahead and do that. We can count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons. And you'll notice that there's actually 6 carbons in the chemical formula. And 1, 2, I only draw 2 hydrogens, and I've only drawn 1, 2, 3 oxygens out of the 6. Because this is just sort of an abbreviated skeleton structure. We're only going to draw the most important parts of glucose. And then the other parts, they're there, but we're just not going to draw them, just for convenience and simplicity's sake. All right, so this is sort of the skeleton formula or skeleton structure, sorry, of glucose. And you can see that it's actually a hexagon. Now let's take a look at fructose, and you'll see that it's going to be a little bit different. It's actually going to be in the shape of a pentagon, kind of a house that's kind of caved in on the sides. That's the way I like to think of it. The oxygen is at the top, and off of the sides are going to be a carbon atom here and a carbon atom here. So there's two branches coming off of this molecule, and there are some functional groups also. And I'm not going to worry about that. But I just wanted to show you the carbon atoms. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And fructose also has 6 carbons, but you can see that they're actually oriented a little bit differently. The atoms are actually connected together a little bit differently. I like to think of this as kind of like bricks. Everybody's familiar with a brick, but depending on how you put those bricks together, you can build all kinds of different things. You could build a driveway, you could build a house, you could build a fireplace, depending on how you arrange the bricks. Well, it's kind of like that a little bit with atoms. We got the same number and type of atoms here, but by connecting them in different orientations, we can actually create different molecules with different sweetnesses, different properties, things like that. And these are probably the two most common sugars, glucose and fructose. So I just wanted to bring that up. All right, these two guys, glucose and fructose, are actually referred to as isomers. They're isomers of each other. And isomers are simply molecules that have the same structural, or the same chemical formula, but different structural formulas. That's what isomers are. And there's lots of different isomers in the world, but these are isomers. These are isomers that we kind of need to be familiar with when we're talking about biology, especially glucose, because it's going to be so important when we get into cellular respiration and when we get into photosynthesis. We really need to understand the structure of glucose, and we need to understand those functional groups that glucose contains. All right, so these are monosaccharides. And again, a monosaccharide is a single molecule of sugar. So this is one monosaccharide, this is one monosaccharide. Sometimes a single molecule of something is referred to as a monomer. And then by connecting up these monomers, these single molecules, we can make huge structures, just like bricks can make driveways, or bricks can make bigger structures like houses. Well, we can take these smaller units of sugar, these smaller molecules of sugar, and by putting them together in different ways, we can create huge structures called polysaccharides, poly for many. So let's go ahead and we'll talk about those just a little bit. I'm going to erase this. Let's go ahead and throw the word polysaccharide up there. Again, poly means many, and saccharide means sugar or sweet. And there's lots of different polysaccharides, but there's 3 really big ones that I would like you to be familiar with. Number 1 is going to be called glycogen. And glycogen is a polysaccharide. It's actually made up of hundreds to thousands of glucose molecules all connected to each other. And this is how animals store sugar. This is how animals store sugar longer term, for more than a day or so. They're going to put it in the form of glycogen and store it until they need it. And then they'll break it down into glucose again and make it available for all the cells to use. Another important polysaccharide is going to be starch. And starch, kind of the same as glycogen, but it's a little bit different. Still made out of glucose molecules, but now they're oriented in a slightly different way. But this molecule is still big, just like glycogen. It's made up of hundreds to thousands of glucose molecules all connected together. And starch is the way plants store glucose long term. And then when a plant needs that sugar for energy, it breaks down that starch into glucose molecules and again makes it available for all the cells to use in the plants. Alright, number 3 is going to be cellulose. And cellulose, again, is a great big molecule, a great big polymer made up of hundreds to thousands of glucose molecules. And now these glucose molecules have a different function. Cellulose is actually used to make cell walls in plants, kind of a rigid structure, totally different property than starch and glycogen, totally different purpose. But again, it is a huge, huge molecule made up of many, many, many small molecules of sugar. So these are our 3 big polysaccharides that we need to be familiar with. Alright, how do we actually build these types of molecules? Well, it comes down to a special type of chemical reaction called a dehydration reaction. So let's go ahead and draw that. We'll put that on the board, and we'll start by drawing a single molecule of glucose. So I'm going to draw a hexagon. Actually, I'm going to draw it a little bit differently. I'm going to draw it this way. Here we go. There's the hexagon. I'm going to put an oxygen on that corner, and I'm going to put a carbon branch. That's a carbon coming off the main structure. They call that a branch. And I'm then going to draw my hydroxyl group. So there's one here, and here's another one over here. And I draw those in red because those are so important. I want to highlight that. I want to highlight the fact that those are so important, and that's going to be where the site for the chemical reaction is going to take place. Alright, I'm also going to draw another one over here. So here we go. Glucose number 2. There we go. Put our branch up there, the oxygen over there. And again, coming off of these 2 carbons are going to be hydroxyl groups. And there we go. There we go. Now what's going to happen here is a chemical reaction is going to take place, but it's a special type of chemical reaction. We're going to call it a dehydration reaction because we're going to remove, in a sense, a molecule of water from these 2 sugar molecules. So that's what, think of dehydration as the removal of water. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to remove a single water molecule. So what's going to happen is the chemical bond between this hydrogen and oxygen is going to get broken. And this chemical bond right here between the carbon and the oxygen is going to get broken. And helper molecules participate in this chemical reaction. These helper molecules are called enzymes. And they're very specific, so the chemical reactions are always going to happen in the same place over and over and over. So these helper molecules called enzymes break the chemical bonds here and here. And you can see I've got an OH and I've got an H. And if I take this H and attach it to that oxygen, we're going to end up making a water molecule. And then we're going to actually remove it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to circle these atoms because they're going to be the ones that get removed. And they get removed as a water molecule. That's why it's called a dehydration reaction. And then what's going to happen is this carbon atom, we're going to form a brand new chemical bond between this carbon atom and that oxygen atom. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to erase these atoms because they're going to take off, they're going to join the other gazillion water molecules in the body. That's where they go. They just don't disappear. Now this oxygen is still left there. And all I'm going to do is connect this up, this carbon atom to this oxygen atom. And now we've got 2 glucose molecules chemically attached to each other. Now we can call that a disaccharide because di means 2. So this is 2 sugar molecules, a disaccharide. And then if I continue to add more and more glucose molecules, I'm actually going to make a polysaccharide. Now, one last thing. This chemical reaction is actually reversible. And another enzyme is going to participate in that chemical reaction. And this type of chemical reaction is called a hydrolysis reaction. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write that down. Hydrolysis reaction. Hydro, meaning water, and lysis, to break apart or to split apart. So what's going to happen is we're going to add a water molecule back. When we want to break this apart, the body's going to call upon another enzyme, and that enzyme is going to grab a water molecule from the gazillion or so that are in the cell or in whatever organism we're talking about, and it's going to break the hydrogen away from the oxygen, and we're going to put those atoms back on just the way they were before. We're going to reattach the atoms. So in a sense, this is what we're going to do. The enzyme is going to break the chemical bond. It's going to break this chemical bond here. And here's our water molecule. I'm going to draw its structural formula. And the water molecule is going to break that chemical bond there. The OH is going to get put back on here, just where it was before. And then the hydrogen is going to get reattached to this oxygen, just like it was before. And we're going to end up with two glucose molecules all over again. So depending upon the cell's needs, we can actually connect glucose molecules together via dehydration reactions, or we can break them apart via hydrolysis reactions. We can break those polymers, those long chains of glucose molecules apart, and end up with just glucose again. And that's going to be it for carbohydrates.